translating in, the phrase that's often used by casters is loud and organic. Loud and organic, which you could substitute organic for any number of things. In the case of Donald Trump, you might think obnoxious or any number of other adjectives. But he was successful in part because he does, I think of him as a reality TV prototype. And a kind of an ideal type, really, in a bigger sense. Whether that will translate well to politics, I think politics proper, remains to be seen. It's not working for him so well, frankly. Now, the kind of, so he goes beyond the performance of, say like Reagan in the 80s or the first or second Bush, the sort of performance of a kind of masculinity that's populist. I'm one of you. I mean, despite being a Connecticut blue blood and a Texas ranch and the land and being down home, and that sort of performance does well in politics. But that's not Donald Trump. It's a very different. I think he's much less predictable. He's much less consistent in terms of what he says. That it's not clear. He hasn't crystallized for people, I think, in terms of a political orientation, and that makes him an outsider. But he was very good on The Apprentice. And there's a reason why that show lasted as long as it did. Yeah, Joe.
So this is one of those obnoxious questions where I'm going to make a statement and then make it a question by saying, what do you think of that?
Okay.
First of all, I was really glad to see you put up Candid Camera, one of my favorite shows as a kid. But I also, there's a serious point here, is that I remember when I started reading about Garfinkel and ethnomethodology and the breaching experiments and saying, well, duh, Candid Camera, right? And then wondering, in fact, there was a relation. They were aware of each other in some ways, as far as I understand. And then I was also thinking about reading, I routinely assigned an introduction to sociology, namely Peter Berger's Invitation to Sociology, in which he says that a sociologist is a voyeur, is always peeking behind the curtains, wanting to know about these worlds that aren't visible. But there's a certain element in reality television. We want access to these weird little niche worlds that we don't see every day. Then you quoted Nick Coldry, I'm going to say his name's Coldry, and the idea that this is sort of the way in which we become aware of sociality versus individuality. And so my interpretation of this, the argument I want to sort of put out there to see if it has any, makes any sense, is that there is, in a way, reality television is a McDonaldization of sociology. Right? Or that, at very least, there are some threads between, McDonaldization, but what I mean by that is sort of this, I know McDonaldization means routinized work, but what I mean by that is the fake version, the cheap version, the non-nutritious version. So what are the threads between a sociological sensibility, which since the 1960s has sort of become part of American culture, and the kind of voyeuristic social group breaching experiment kind of insight that, in other words, is this good for sociology or bad for sociology?
I want it. I don't know, good or bad, but I mean, I think it's good in the sense that it gives us a lot of stuff to talk about. Sociological sense of it, right? I actually see them as very different ways of representing so-called everyday life, to be honest. Reality TV is a hyper version of what media, doesn't kind of overdrive or hyper mode what the media does generally, which is in fact not focus on the ordinary, but focus on the extraordinary. Nobody wants to see my real life, right, on TV because it's really boring. But so reality TV might ostensibly be about real life at some level, but it's about a mediatized version of that, obviously. And so I see sociologists as more interested in the patterns and routines and the consistencies in the structural nature or whatever, fill in the blank, as opposed to the media, which is much more interested in the extraordinary, the exceptional, the individual motivations and performances. And sociologists study the sort of cultural and structural performances of our
So you don't see any kind of like really watered down, embarrassing ethnographic sensibility?
Oh, in terms of the breaching experiments and yeah, I mean, so the contemporary version of Candid Camera is a show called Punk'd, right? And so it's kind of the same premise. Yes, in that specific instance, I suppose. Those were in some ways more experimental modes of sociology, right?
I mean, Donahue was very much informed by social science and dialogue with it.
Yes. Yes. And there's a reason why he began falling to the wayside. I mean, his show lasted for a really long time. He was on the air for 27 years.
Yeah.
So it was a long time, but there was a reason why Oprah began to eclipse him. And her focus was much more psychological and individual. And his was more sociological. And frankly, that's the thing we all realize as professional sociologists or as students learning about sociology, is that culturally we're often swimming upstream. And I think reality TV really epitomizes how the upstreamness of how we move as sociologists, to be honest. So the specific example you gave, I can certainly see the connection, but in an overall general sense, I don't see as much.
Another student that had
And I did a little more thought about Trump, which is one of the reasons why he's good in reality TV, but maybe is not necessarily the right, politics isn't necessarily the right medium for him, is this thing I kept mentioning over and over, unfiltered. The guy says whatever pops into his head, right? I mean, this is probably what makes him a good character on television. Is not necessarily what's going to ingratiate him with the Republican Party, for sure. Right? Unfiltered. That's Donald Trump. He's the poster child for this.
So I think we have Andre, and then Peter, and Brad, and Sean, and Yasmin. And no students. Those are all biding their time. Yeah.
So what I found really interesting is the way that you're almost like sort of describing like a new subjectivity to me that feels like it's crossing borders, right? And so when I talk to I teach a course on media and everyday life, and when we talk about like selfies and Facebook, performing oneself, saying things interesting all the time, displaying the body, be yourself, be big, but at the same time be genuine, be funny, sexy, confrontational, confident, spontaneous, organic. These are the ways they feel actually that they have to perform to be themselves, like in online content.
That's my
right?
daughter you just described.
What?
That's my 14-year-old daughter you just described.
So it seems like really interesting that this reality television it's not staying within the confines of reality television. It's sort of like on one hand encouraging a certain kind of subjectivity, and at the same time like exactly, which I find to be so interesting here.
Yeah, no, thank you for that point. I mean, that's in fact some of the conversation we had earlier in the seminar revolved precisely around this issue of the slippage between these realms and these sort of social fields, right, institutional fields of person production, whether it's service work, whether it's social media, whether it's reality TV, whether it's politics. There's a I think there's a heightened pressure around performativity that is new. Performativity is not new, but the infrastructure that supports it and displays it and disperses it is new. And how it changes the way we think of who we are, how we necessarily sociologists get access to that, other than by careful observation and paying attention to what especially young people tell us.
And I have, just, if it's okay, just one more other quick thing. Is this idea of the ordinary, I find incredibly interesting. And I'm wondering, what does this do to our understanding of what is ordinary?
Yeah.
Does this refashion what we think of as ordinary? Does it shrink it? Does it expand? Like, how do you see this?
I don't think it changes things that much, because I think
Okay.
it's understood that within this media context, ordinary doesn't mean average or representative, typical. It's a category of performance.
Okay.
So we still have the other term of ordinary, the other meanings associated with ordinary, but that's not what's meant by the term ordinary celebrity or ordinary participant.
Yeah, I wanted to pick up on this idea of the instructions that we given to the courts and mediums. I've always, and different sort of perspective that I think people use to make sense of some of this. And that's Norbert Elias's idea.
Yes.
And his wonderful phrase that the control of controlling the emotion. So his thesis is that in every society we are, as it were, way too controlled in the normal stability of everything. We've lost the capability and opportunities for uncontrolled and expressive creativity. And so what we institute in our societies are specific sorts of occasions. Spaces, but they are controlled that context of emotion control.
All out like the carnival.
The carnival is one example. So and so that I think would be a very good explanation of this. I mean, it looks on the surface as if they're unfiltered and uncontrolled being themselves, but of course, as we know when we look at these programs quite closely,
It's deeply controlled,
deeply
yes.
constructed moments of expressiveness. And like in the Springer show, it's the wonderful example that very brings yet to these wonderful Chicago Cubs, an act of love and contain and control these individuals. But there are moments, therefore, that allow us some sort of experimenting expressiveness, which allows us to see that there is schisms and differences and conflicts that exist that otherwise are very difficult to see.
So if I email you later about it, you will send all that to me in an email.
It's in the Jerry Springer paper, I wrote it in 2000.
Okay. Well, that I have. Yes, I think that's true.
But it
I think
raises
there's-
questions about this question of the instructions that would be built and then this is questions about authenticity.
Right. Right, and I think that what it makes me think of is, well, what did Carnival look like before it became Disneyfied, basically? And I think the same thing could be said about these experiments, whether it's through media or in other spaces where we experiment with inversion or we allow emotional expressivity, free reign, blah, blah, blah. But there's always this initial limited cultivation where there's a certain unpredictability about it, and people are sort of figuring it out. And then it becomes really more formulaic, more routinized, more commodified, more industrialized, blah, 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 right? So there are these moments. This is why, if anyone, people probably do not know, this is much more trivia than you've ever learned about reality TV, but the very first season of Big Brother in the US actually had this really interesting narrative arc because the formula wasn't solidified enough yet that producers could really figure out how to completely control the contestants. And there was intervention from the, so people probably know about this, but there's intervention from the outside to try to get the competitors to forego the competition and actually act in collaboration with each other in order to forget about the prize money, but just get along and be, not be Lord of the Flies, but be Kumbaya, basically, right? And so there was this talk of them all walking out of the show and saying, F you, NBC, or CBS, it was CBS. And they almost did it. But then the producers began separating them off and figuring out how to work on their insecurities and go well done, we didn't end up walking off the show. It could only have happened that once, because then the formula becomes much more institutionalized.
Just to follow up on that, interesting Endemol,
Yes, it's a Dutch company.
when they were first thinking about this program, they were thinking of things like Zimbardo's.
Yes.
They thought it was going to be a science program, and then they were going to basically have social psychology.
There you go, there's your social science connection, sure. A natural experiment, yes, in so-called human nature. Only it's always culture, right? Yeah.
So the actual example you just gave about the producers trying to reinforce a more competitive ethos is actually leads well to my question, and it's this, you know, if this kind of genre is actually having an impact on people's ordinary lives, particularly when we're working class. I mean, a sense it might be, deleterious in two ways. One is it kind of fostering a more individualistic kind of outlook and mindset, and secondly, more concretely, kind of fostering more dilution ethic. And you see that with obviously Jersey Shore as a pretty good example of that, being sort of held up as an exemplar for these younger adults. And I'm particularly struck this week by this new data from these two economists at Princeton showing dramatic increases in mortality among working class Americans, connecting in part to alcohol use. Of course, Jersey Shore, it's discrete example. I'm just wondering, kind of, what do you think is sort of the broader sociological effect of this kind of popular culture on ordinary people's lives?
Well, I'm not, that's a question for TV more generally and media more generally,
Right.
I think. My first impulse whenever I heard the word effects are to start screaming in the other direction. I don't think we have very good evidence or ways of measuring how media affects anybody. All we can do is, because, for example, just think about Canada gets all of the U.S. media. It has like a fraction of the homicide rate. It looks nothing. People act nothing like Americans. Well, it depends on how intimately you understand the differences. But the elderly are the heaviest consumers of television. They're the least, especially people are trying to make these links between violence and media or something. They watch the most television. They commit the fewest crimes in society. So this idea of there being a one-to-one correspondence between what people see and how they behave or how it affects them, I don't think we have very good ways of knowing that or measuring that. I think what you're asking, though, is about a more cultural influence.
Right, but I would think advertisers, they're not stupid. I mean, there's some sense that kind of by placing their ads in certain shows, by getting certain messages out to the United, they're going to have some impact on behavior. I don't think it's kind of a simple one-to-one thing, but there's probably some impact for spending hours on end watching this type of stuff. And more concretely, we know from the work that's been done in Brazil on the dissemination of telenovelas, and it was done kind of at different points in time in different parts of the country.
Right.
That tracked very closely to huge dramatic demographic shifts in Brazil. So the first regions that got the signals in Brazil, some of the biggest changes in family life first. So I'm just trying to figure out, do you have any sense about kind of what does this mean kind of practically in people's lives beyond sort of what, beyond just watching the stuff?
Well, more micro response is that I don't think, let's say working class people watching Jersey Shore, I don't think they don't make their connection necessarily. Nobody ever sees themselves in what's going on necessarily on TV. We're always, people who are in the audience always feel like they're the exception. Well, other people might be affected by media, but I'm not. The more sociological response, though, is I think that, I see it mostly along the lines of what I said earlier around these issues around increasing individuality, the kind of individualization of everything, right? That reality TV helps to reinforce that. Reality TV didn't invent that, obviously, but it's helping to reinforce that. Everything is about the individual. And I do think there's some connection there to larger sort of political economy, and to, in other words, I think one of the biggest things reality TV is doing in terms of influencing the culture is the same thing social media is doing, which is this emphasis on performativity as a form of currency. I won't say power, because I don't, maybe, but a form of currency, perhaps a new subjectivity, as Andre was saying. Beyond that, I'm not really sure, because I don't see reality as that different than, say, talk shows before them, or before that, these other kinds of shows, right? So, you sound like you have an answer in mind.
I just think that it's, in the packing sense, it's kind of a number. It just fosters a certain enemy, that does, it's not particularly helpful. So and also, but more concretely, I was talking about Robert Putnam's book, Rolling Alone, and her work he did sort of showing there is this correlation between the amount of time people are viewing television and the extent to which they're engaged in local civic institutions. There's also obviously a big class divide between all that as well.
Right.
How much people watch.
Right, take television away from those people, you're not necessarily going to go participate in civic institutions. So, I don't know. Yeah.
Brad used to watch Cake Boss, I think, because
Cake Boss.
There's a team, they have to meet a deadline, they work together, they work on the environment. When I was listening to your talk, I really found your talk very instructive because I watched very little TV. And I have a 16-year-old home who wants to get into college, and she's been working on her college essays for a really long time. And she's been to talks where they tell you how to do a college essay. And by the way, to do a college essay, you have to touch them. You have to make them feel who you are. You have to demonstrate your writing.
Touch their soul, you'll get it.
And you can pay people to tell you how to do this. So I'll find that this has happened to reality TV, that there are people making money from it, there are specialists, there's a differentiation of this social enterprise as it gets larger and the stakes get higher. That's not unusual. So I found it very instructive, but I didn't understand what was bad about it. I didn't understand, I know you didn't like it, you said it was commodification, which is a bad word, but I didn't understand what really is wrong with what you found.
With the growing infrastructure? Oh, right. What's wrong with the growing infrastructure?
Yeah.
You mean surrounding buttressing up
Yes.
emotional economy? I don't know that it's that there's something wrong with it. I think it's evidence of the increasing prevalence of and the imperative toward performativity. And so you begin to see this thickening, these cottage industries basically, which are increasingly institutionalized, growing up around these spheres of performance. I don't know that it's bad necessarily. I don't think it's necessarily instructing people how to be better performers per se. I think what it's doing is giving other people a job. I mean, it's keeping other people very busy. Whether it's actually translating into being a better performer or getting into college. I think that's an open question.
And on that note, I want to invite you all tomorrow, where Laura will be speaking again, along with other guests from University of Leicester and London School of Economics, 12 to 2 in 107 Clark, a forum in honor of the media sociologist Nora Levis, who was a mentor to all of us and a very dear friend. 12 to 2 tomorrow will be reception following. And please join us